Deep within the whispering heart of an ancient forest, where sunlight struggled to pierce the dense canopy, stood a relic of a bygone era, an old wooden house, its timbers groaning under the weight of untold stories. It was here that a young man named Ethan, seeking refuge from the cacophony of city life, decided to make his new home. He was drawn to the solitude, the illusion of peace that the wilderness promised. But the forest and the house it cradled held secrets far older and more sinister than he could ever have imagined. The first few days were deceptively tranquil, filled with the simple tasks of unpacking and settling in. Ethan would spend his evenings on the porch, listening to the symphony of the woods, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the distant call of an owl. However, as the sun bled out from the sky each evening, plunging the world into an inky blackness, a different kind of presence began to make itself known. It started subtly, a primal sense of being watched that prickled the hairs on the back of his neck. He would dismiss it as a trick of the light, the paranoia of isolation, or perhaps a curious nocturnal animal. But then he saw them. From the deepest, most impenetrable shadows of the surrounding trees, a pair of eyes glowed with a faint otherworldly luminescence. They were not the eyes of any creature he knew. They held a chilling intelligence, a malevolent curiosity that seemed to burn straight through him, into the very core of his soul. At first, the encounters were fleeting, peripheral. A flicker of light in the corner of his vision as he looked out the window, a momentary gleam from the dark hallway as he passed. The feeling of unease that had been a gentle hum now escalated into a constant thrumming dread. The eyes were no longer content to remain outside. They began to manifest within the house itself, a pair of silent, glowing sentinels that followed his every move. He would be in the kitchen, the familiar scent of coffee brewing, and he would catch their reflection in the polished surface of the toaster, watching from the dark doorway behind him. He'd turn, heart hammering against his ribs, only to find an empty, silent space. He would climb the creaking stairs to his bedroom, and the eyes would be there, peering through the gap between the steps, their light casting long, distorted shadows on the wall. They were in every room, every corner, every reflection. They were a constant, suffocating presence, an invasion that offered no respite. The silence of the house was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, expectant, and filled with the unspoken threat of those luminous, haunting orbs. The psychological torment soon escalated into a full-blown auditory assault. The silence was shattered by whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the house. They were sibilant and ancient, speaking in a language he couldn't comprehend, yet the meaning was terrifyingly clear. The whispers were invitations, promises of dark knowledge and forgotten power. They coaxed and cajoled, their sound weaving through the air like a venomous serpent. They called his name, even stretching the syllables into a chilling, ethereal chant. Accompanying the whispers were the sounds of echoing footsteps, always just a few paces behind him. He would stop, holding his breath, and the footsteps would stop too. He would quicken his pace, and the phantom steps would match his, a mocking, relentless pursuit. The house, his supposed sanctuary, had become a labyrinth of fear, and the eyes were the architects of his madness. They seemed to lure him, to draw him deeper into the home's dark, decaying heart. He'd find himself inexplicably drawn to the cellar, the door ajar, the oppressive darkness within seeming to pulse with the same faint light as the eyes. He'd feel a pull towards the attic, the whispers promising secrets hidden among the dust and cobwebs. He was a prisoner in his own home, and the eyes were his omnipresent wardens, their silent gaze a constant reminder that he was not alone, and he was not welcome. The line between reality and hallucination blurred into a terrifying, indistinct haze. Sleep offered no escape. It was merely a different stage for the same horrifying play. His dreams were vivid, nightmarish tapestries woven with the glowing eyes. In these dreams, he was running through an endless, shifting version of the house, the corridors stretching and twisting into impossible shapes. The eyes were everywhere, lining the walls, the ceilings, the floors, a million points of malevolent light all fixed upon him. He would run until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, only to find himself back where he started, the whispers laughing at his futile efforts. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his body trembling, the phantom sensation of being watched more intense than ever. The exhaustion was a physical weight, a crushing burden that stooped his shoulders and hollowed his eyes. His reflection in the mirror was that of a stranger, a gaunt, pale figure with a haunted look. The house was consuming him, draining him of his vitality, his sanity, his very essence, and feeding it to the insatiable darkness that lurked behind those terrible glowing eyes. He knew he had to leave. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, a sudden moment of clarity in the fog of his terror. The forest was no longer a haven, it was a cage. The house was not a home, it was a tomb. Panic, cold and sharp, finally seized him. With a desperate primal scream that tore from his throat, Ethan scrambled for the front door, his only thought to escape, to run, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the suffocating presence of the house. He fumbled with the old iron lock, his fingers slick with sweat and shaking uncontrollably. But as he wrenched the door open, his hope for freedom was instantly extinguished, replaced by a wave of absolute soul-crushing despair. The eyes were no longer just watching from a distance, they were here. They were everywhere. The porch, the lawn, the ancient trees, the entire landscape was filled with them. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of glowing pairs of eyes had closed in, forming a silent, impenetrable perimeter around the house. They floated in the air, peered from behind every tree trunk, and stared up from the very ground itself, a silent, luminous army that had come to claim him. They were not just watching anymore. They were surrounding him, cutting off every path, every hope of escape. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an unseen energy that made his skin crawl and his teeth ache. The whispers intensified, no longer a faint echo but a deafening chorus that swirled around him, a vortex of sound that threatened to tear his mind apart. The eyes pulsed in unison, their light growing brighter, more intense, a malevolent beacon in the encroaching darkness. He was trapped, a fly caught in a web of supernatural design, and the spiders were closing in. In that final horrifying moment, as the sea of eyes converged upon him, Ethan felt a cold, unearthly force envelop him. He let out one last strangled cry, a sound that was swallowed by the immense, oppressive silence of the forest. And then he was gone. He vanished without a trace, as if he had never been there at all, absorbed into the very fabric of the darkness he had so desperately tried to flee. The old wooden house stood empty once more, silent and waiting under the watchful gaze of the ancient trees. And deep within its shadowed rooms, and in the impenetrable darkness of the surrounding woods, the haunting eyes continued to glow, their eerie light cutting through the blackness, forever watching, forever searching for their next victim.